Today, I spoke to Michi Jakob. He was the global head emerging markets low syndication at Credit Suisse, which means he is the big boss for syndicated loans in emerging markets. I met him at Deutsche Bank when I was in New York back in 2001, 25 years ago. And we remained connected all these years. We spoke about culture. How is it to work for Credit Suisse and Deutsche Bank? We spoke about syndicated loan. We spoke about a career in syndicated loan. We spoke about a career in Latin America. We spoke about a couple of transactions that were really relevant for him. And on the personal side, he holds a big surprise for you. Very unexpected. I doubt any other guest will have something that unusual to talk about. And that makes really sense. You're gonna love the conversation I had with Michi Jakob. Today we have a very special guest at Diário de Banker. We have Michi Jakob, specialist in loans in emerging markets and credit Latin America. I've met Michi at Deutsche Bank in the early 2000s. So the first time I went to New York, he was there next to me doing transactions in Latin America. Totally different times. So Michi, I'm very pleased you're here today. It was a last minute call. You reach out, you're here in Brazil, you're here in São Paulo, and you say, you know what? I need to interview this guy.
Oh boy.
And it worked, you know? I love that. That's always the best interviews, the ones that you don't expect. So would you explain to our audience, what have you done over the years at Credit Suisse and Deutsche Bank?
Well, first of all, Jose, thank you very much for having me. Last minute seems to be the theme of the market anyway. So thanks for having me. And it's a pleasure speaking to this audience. So what have I been doing the last 25 years since last we met? Let me focus pretty much the last 18 years, 16 years of which I was at Credit Suisse, most recently as the global head of emerging markets loan syndication. So that's essentially the function that every transaction, the private markets that the firm syndicated, I was either directly involved in syndicating it, forming the syndicates, or my team was involved. So I was New York based and was very day-to-day involved in the Latin American side of the business, but I also had the desk that did the whole thing for CEMEA report to me, and I had the oversight also over the underwriting capacity. I left Credit Suisse in 2022 in the context of obviously major strategy change, to put it in the most polite way.
Exactly.
And I've since set up my own firm called Global Capital Consult. And that was really the continuation of my career, but now independently, when I very quickly realized in my position, level of seniority was very unlikely to find a similar position in a structured environment, but also very quickly realized that I've done this for a long time, and people still wanted to work with me. So I set up my own firm now, really conceptually as an outsourced syndicate desk, and focus on a lot of debt raising, in a market where, let's say, the big banks don't typically play.
All right. Would you explain what a syndication is?
The syndication is it's really the formation of a group of capital providers, none of which alone would want to provide debt, the word is used in the equity markets as well, to finance a company for a number of reasons, capital constraints, credit limits, or whatever. So a syndicate is really typically a group of lenders, or in the debt capital markets, or bondholders, who in their entirety provide a lending facility to a company.
And that way they do that to diversify risk.
So there are two aspects, right? For the individual lenders, they can participate in transactions and can diversify their portfolio, their lending portfolio. The benefit, obviously, for a company is rather than having, say, 15 separate lending facilities, they have one lending facility that is administered typically by one agent. They have only one set of reports to provide. They have one phase of interaction, instead of having to monitor, a whole broad range of facilities.
And the leader is usually called a ranger?
Lead arranger. There's a whole lot of, debate, and it's relevant for league tables. But lead arranger typically, or what's the other one that, global coordinator. There are various terms, right?
But it's normally one bank leading the whole transaction?
Depending on the size of transaction, it's anywhere between 1 and 5 or...
All right.
No, it's there some, transactions have 5 or even more, and then, it can be anywhere from 1 to, I've seen as many as 10, but then it was kind of more of a club deal or, so.
Got it.
Yeah. There is no technical limit or there's nothing academic about it.
Give me an idea of size. How big is this syndication, loan syndication, globally in Latin America and emerging markets? This is
as this is a very last minute. I have not had a chance to give you, to look up the data, but I give you a sense.
Yeah.
So, and that's data I remember from a couple of years ago.
All right.
I think the Latin American, if you look at Latin, the Latin American loan market any given year is anywhere between 25 and maybe $50 billion. And that is very skewed towards large transactions, because some of the big names every year do their corporate revolver. So I don't know the amount of transactions, or I don't recall the exact geographical, breakdown. Now, this is Latin America. The largest market, invariably still to this date, is the US. And just to put in perspective, and again, I apologize, I don't know the absolute numbers. I remember a couple of years ago, an article coming out in the news clip, what a bad start into the year the US loan market had, that in the first week, only 35 billion were printed. So a bad week, a bad January week in the US loan market is a good year in the Latin American loan market.
Oh, wow.
So, and again, these numbers are shifting, but the bulk of it, and they're also very different markets. The Latin American market historically has been very much bank driven. The US market is much more institutional driven. So there is no homogeneous thing as the market. And then obviously over the recent years, we've got a shift also as the private lenders have, entered the market, and that yet again kind of shifts the whole balance.
All right. Just to give you a sense of perspective, the Brazilian debt capital market reached $100 billion last year, including onshore and offshore. So it's very relevant compared to Brazil. And can you talk a little bit about credit analysis? That must be one of your expertises.
Well, funny enough, it's not.
All right.
And
tell me more.
No, because obviously I have a good understanding of credit.
All right.
But I have always focused more on the market.
Because
my job was not so much kind of, the individual credit. Obviously, I have to have a very good and solid understanding of credit and the fundamentals.
All right.
But I was always, and continue to be mostly, or very focused on the market. What can the market absorb? What is a price point that the market might demand? What's the potential, demand if somebody needs to raise $250 million? Do we have visibility on really getting to $250 million in the context if the firm I worked for was willing to provide an underwriting and take on the risk and distribute later? So, yes, my outlook was always very much or more focused on the market, obviously on the heels of a solid understanding of credit.
So basically, you will take a look at the credit analysis, but in principle, this transaction has a solid credit profile. And then given that, or assuming it has a solid credit profile of whatever type it is, then you will assess if that will be demand in the market and where that demand is. And maybe you can suggest a different structure or a
different price, or think about maybe we need more collateral, or like there's a variety of aspects, and, the term, it's a solid credit, even a less solid credit, there might be a market for it. It might just be a different outlet,
Yeah.
So not everything is AAA. No, I mean, so it's always, we use the term, it has to be a solid credit. Well, there can be very challenging credits that can still be placed, but at different price points, maybe with different compensation components. So the word a solid credit is kind of a relative term.
Exactly. Well, obviously, having worked in this market for 25 years helps. But in addition to that, what do you think your essential qualities are? Is it a more technical job? Is it more a relationship job? What's more important?
See, the cynic that I am, I always say I'm actually not a financial guy.
All right, I'm loving this.
I'm a people's person.
All right.
And what do I mean by this? There are a lot of people who are extremely good and can very technically analyze every situation. There are people you can call, make the infamous call at 3 a.m. in the morning, and you ask them in tab 38, in 2027, why does the EBITDA rise by 2.5% as opposed to, the following year projected 3.7?
Uh-huh.
And
They explain that.
They explain it, and they're very good, and that's very important.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. Now, my job has always been, and that's, I think, where I, which is a quality not everybody has, but some people have it, is more finding the person who wants to have the conversation about this. Because at the end of the day, syndication, loan distribution, and, to a similar extent also, debt capital markets, all the other dynamics at times to play, is knowing who would want to look at the situation and, eventually, be the right person to actually also join the transaction, So, and obviously I'm very loosely saying that I'm only a people's person.
Yeah.
Again, it's on the back of a good understanding what investors are looking for. And then it's more kind of connecting the dots. Okay, this credit with these parameters, we had a conversation with X investor. They told me they're looking for that return profile in this country. Let's call that. So you want to make these, high impact calls or work with whoever you work with, say, do me a favor, call this person, give me the feedback. So it's really more of a juggling kind of, knowing how to read the room, knowing how to read the markets kind of a job that I've always done. Yeah.
That's fantastic. Tell me a little bit about how it was to work for Credit Suisse, and if you can compare it, how was compared to Deutsche Bank?
Boy, I'm under strict NDA.
We don't need to talk about it.
No. That's a question. There are many facets to it.
Yeah.
Quite frankly, Deutsche Bank is, my experience at Deutsche Bank was very different because I started at Deutsche Bank as an apprentice out of school.
All right.
And then, did internships. Actually, my first job at Deutsche was an internship in Buenos Aires in 1985 without having any training.
All right.
And that's in itself a separate, story to be told over a drink. And then I did an internship, and then I went to university. While at university, even did another internship at the time. It's probably one of the first interns ever that Deutsche Bank sent to Indonesia in 1989.
Is that right?
Then, after finishing undergraduate, I convinced or had a constructive conversation with Deutsche Bank that paid for my master's.
Uh-huh.
Then I started as a trainee. So when I finished Cambridge, I think the only reason they paid for it because it played a little bit to their ego.
Uh-huh.
So and then I was a trainee. So I was always more, the junior although I made it, my last job was director of Latin American loan syndications, in New York until 2002. I think there were similar aspects of the culture, and kind of a bit, let's put it honestly, a bit of a cutthroat culture where you had to be kind of very firm. But then also, I did some things in between. I think the culture at Credit Suisse, was for most of the time in emerging market, was a very strong emerging markets force. And it was very interesting that actually most of the senior people from when I interviewed in 2006 until I left in 2016, most of the people, not at the, two-mention level above, but on the transactional side in emerging markets, they were all the same. So it was longevity, there was teamwork, it was hard work, but also, work hard, play hard. And we had some fun between, and the rest is history.
If you want to work in the financial markets in a large international bank, you need to ace your English. You need a perfect English. You need to speak like a native speaker. In order to get there, it will help to spend some time abroad, maybe in the US, maybe in England, or any other English-speaking country. But not everybody can do that. So you get to do the next best alternative, which is bringing English to your life. And why not attend some classes in English? So thinking about that, I have a very special course to offer to you. Why don't you watch Introduction to Investment Banking in English? So Introduction to Investment Banking is a coursework that I have prepared that talks about investment banking, what we do, what you need to know, what are the main products. I talk a little bit about M&A. I talk a little bit about equity capital markets, IPOs, and follow-ons, everything in English. So you want to try that, you like the content, and you want to practice your English at the same time, you have to watch Introduction to Investment Banking by Banking. All right. Now I want to switch gears to talking about career. And I want to have the perspective of the undergrad students that are listening to the podcast and deciding what they want to do for life. Tell me what a junior analyst in syndication would have to know to thrive in this career.
Okay, so on careers in general.
All right.
And for full disclosure, I approach it always with a bit as an organizational cynic. I don't think there is the script for the career.
I agree.
So now, maybe 50 years ago, people thought about a career. So if I start there, it's a very predictable path.
Yeah.
I think this is rapidly changing. It's already changed in my lifetime. And I only, as a good friend of mine always says, he tells his kids, chances are you have three very distinct careers. Mm-hmm. And they might even be in very different industries. You might start out in banking, switch to hotels, and, become an influencer. I'm making this up, but so, and the other big myth is, which I recently came across, it really spoke to me, and I think it's reflected. People always talk about follow your passion. That's a luxury that nobody has. Ask yourself, what are you good at? And I think that is really, if you are not a person, to your question, what does it take to be good in syndication? If you're a very analytical person, but don't like to talk to people, syndication is not the thing for you. And so I'm not answering, your question directly, but more kind of from various aspects. So what I would, and what I also tell my kids, hey, don't think about, what, where your passion is or what you think makes you the most money. Think about what are you really good at? That people, when you talk to people, say, wow, Jose, this kid is smart. The way he talked about X, this is something that inspired me, Think about, because if you're good at it, you will thrive. The money will follow,
exactly.
And you'll find people who want to work with you. Yeah. So I really think the most important question you can ask yourself is, what am I good at? And then what do I like? Now, to your question in syndication, if you don't like to work with people, you're probably not the right person. And that's not. And there's also the other aspect of it. There's no right and wrong.
Mm-hmm.
There is no script. Think about. I always say, think with your heart, and that gets you to a place where you have fun, where you're good at, and then you connect with people.
Fantastic. And what the people that had worked with you, how they developed this career? If someone that is listening to the podcast now and say, I'm inspired. I like what this guy is talking about. I like what he's done. Then he goes, does some research. I expect you to do some research. And you say, well, maybe syndicate is for me. Where did the professionals that have worked with you came from? Where did they start their careers?
In various places, I mean, I myself, I'm an accidental banker. I never planned this career. It just happened to be so that, again, I got an internship in Buenos Aires, and then it kind of, just happened. And people who have, worked with me or that I see in other places. I mean, it's such a niche position. I don't think you can really plan this. Yeah,
all right.
I mean, as many positions are kind of more accidental. It comes back to, I think it's the whole career planning is, as I say, luck is being prepared for the opportunity. Don't be like in this vision and then you might miss out something else, So talk to people. I think one thing I've learned, is actually never ask people for a job, always ask people for advice. And convince them, because if you ask people for advice and they feel that they are impressed by you, they might say, send me your CV and see whether I see something. If you ask people for a job, you put them in a very difficult position because they might not have something. Yeah. So how do you get into it? I think by talking to people, you always, the trick is to find a point of entry into an organization. And they are very, depending on larger corporates, they're very structured processes. And you see a smaller firm, there might be more kind of, hey, I know this guy, let me make a call, So again, for me, I think it's a big danger is to think there is a script and a path to follow. The most important thing is, I think, take a blank blank sheet of paper and think about, I'm here. How do I want this image to look like? And think about what is the right path for you. Play, with what works for you, not what, somebody told you it works.
Fantastic. I love that advice. And on the other side of the table, you're dealing with, or the banks, you're dealing with hedge funds. Who is on the other side of the table of syndication?
It's
group?
All of the above and more.
All right.
I mean, I always said, when I started in this 25 years ago, people that, it was a very predictable market. There were essentially the banks. We used to do these liquidity analysis. Okay, there is a 3 times levered mining company in Peru. They said, who does mining globally? And 3 times, moderate leverage. Okay, there were very predictably 20 banks you could call, and high likelihood that 75% came in. That has shifted. There are very few global banks, not everything, So then all of a sudden you have hedge funds, you have insurance companies, you have family offices. So it has really become more. I mean, there's an analytical aspect to it, and I don't want to diminish it, but there's also more of an art than a science. And again, it comes to being in touch with the market. And what do I mean by this? This is not just, scrolling your phone. It's more like, okay, who did I talk to? Be in the market, talk to people, and it's really depending on the situation. It could be a combination from a newly formed private credit fund to a well-established emerging dedicated hedge fund to an insurance company. It's really very transaction specific, region specific. One of the things we always talk about, the Latin American market, which I think is a big danger to talk about the Latin American market, because Latin America includes I don't know, 20 plus countries
Yeah.
which are very different. It includes everything from Brazil
To Panama.
to Suriname
Yeah.
to Barbados is part of it, the Caribbean, and they are intrinsically different markets with very different dynamics, with very different investors, so you really have to kind of tackle and really think about context specific rather than, oh yeah, I do Latin America. It's much more granular than that.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I'm loving this conversation. Maybe you never heard of syndicated loans. That's important in Brazil. It's a fraction of the market, but there's some great opportunities there. Maybe that opportunity is for you, maybe not. How do you find out how many different careers are in the market? Well, maybe you should read my book, Head On the Financial Market. 6 Steps to Becoming a Banker. Well, it's in Portuguese here. Has 2 parts. The first part helps you to interview, get you ready to interview and successfully get into the financial markets. And the second part, it explains the financial markets. It explains what are the different careers, what is the evolution in the career, what's the difference between an analyst, an associate, a VP, a director, and also has the day in life of an investment banker, a day in life of a research analyst. So it's a very rich content. This is probably the best place for you to start your research and decide what career fits you best. Read this book. It's available hardcover. It's available online at Kindle, and it's also available at bankersacademy.com.br. Can we switch gears to transaction?
Sure.
So on this part of the podcast, we talk about a transaction, any transaction that was meaningful for you. It doesn't need to be big. It could be small. It could be with a non-name. It could be on a non-name based. Tell me about a transaction that has some meaning for you.
That's another 12 serious conversation. Because different transactions, and again, not to get philosophical, had kind of a different meaning and a different impact and took different times out of my life. Maybe the most meaningful mandate I ever signed was when I set up my own firm and got a mandate 2 weeks into it with a very small monthly retainer. And after having signed, thousands of mandates and credit agreements for large institutions, when I walked out of the office of a small boutique where I sat down with the CEO and signed under my own firm's name a mandate, I left the place and I was literally in tears.
Wow.
I could start because it was so meaningful. So, because that was actually much more meaningful because, wow, you see your own name. I sent a screenshot to my wife, to my former colleague, said, yes. So that was in a way a transaction.
Yeah.
That got me. So that is very different, than having been on transactions, where you had, multi-jurisdictions where we brought in, so transaction I remember we worked on in the Caribbean for a storage facility with a, Hong Kong-based sponsor that we, sold to Korean investors and Caribbean investors. And the firm at the time didn't want to, for reasons that I can't really go to in public, didn't want to hold any risk. So, but the only way to kind of conclude the transaction was to take the last 30 million that we had in place as underwriting, and we had to sell it, I think, within 60 days. And I kind of put my head on the line to say, yes, we can do this. I know it was a high risk thing because it was risky and it was very, and we had to sell. And it was one of those, talk about a nail biter. And I got a call every day, from the head of EM, from the head of credit, where are we? The head of compliance, where are we? So the stress was, ginormous. And And then literally, I think on the evening of the last day where the underwriting period, and people got really nervous and got really pushy, and I got the call, and I back channeled, with the investor that we had in the Caribbean, and literally said, "Where is it? What is, no, it's not good, but yeah, about one more committee." And literally, I think on the evening before the underwriting limit, where probably they would have marked down the position and shouted even more at me. We got the call, hey, we got it approved, let's print, And I remember I was actually on my way to London, sitting in the airport lounge, and I just went to the bar, opened a beer, said, we did it. But again, it's not a meaningful, it's a meaningful transaction. It's one of these things, as I get older, in the larger scope of my life, nobody's going to stand around my graveyard and say, "We're so glad Michi sold that position." But in this moment, you're really, it's like you're in there and calls at night and midnight. But it was like this, we did it. Yes, because I put my credibility on the line with it as well. So that was meaningful. I could give you plenty of war stories here, but that's one that comes to mind where I say, because there was all this tension, then we did it. Let's go.
All right. How do you compare the workload in syndication to investment banking?
Wow, that's another 12 episodes. So it's much more transaction driven. And again, I say it one more time, I'm a bit of a cynic about it. I think the workload in investment banking is inherently poorly managed.
I agree with that.
And it's inherently kind of, the abuse becoming the abusers, not very efficiently done. So assuming that this is the model and it still prevails, and we could debate this model, again, that's a whole other series, The in syndication, it's much more, transaction driven. Like when it's game on, it's game on. We got to sell the risk, set up the bank meeting, call up the people. So it's a very intense period, But then if there's no deal in the market, it's a little bit kind of more casual, So it comes kind of, more in waves. It's deal driven, And so it's somewhat different, And there is not always this constant like in investment banking, particularly junior level, where, unless, you're whatever, work 80 hours, you're not worth it. And it's also, for me, always been a matter of personal style. I've never believed in keeping people there at midnight and call them at 6 a.m., have you done it, just because. Yeah. It's not been my style. I think it's counterproductive. And it's not that you get more done by working this way, it's work smarter, not harder. So again, that's my personal perspective. I cannot speak for the entire industry.
No, perfect. Anything else on transaction that's worth sharing with the public?
Well, it's often the transactions. I think it's almost interesting to follow them. They take always their own life. I remember like one restructuring. I once worked in Mexico, and I was, I was brought in late in the game, and all of a sudden you realize that often transactions get done again on the personal level. There were a lot of egos on the top and the big guys, and then one evening, whatever the not the CFO but the treasurer was, of the company called me at home, said, Michi, can we kind of see how we can get this done? And all of a sudden, the deal did not get done by the big egos, but it actually got done by reasonable people speaking behind. They said, okay, let's see. And again, that's where, on the transaction level, it's often at the people level, Do I trust the person? It's so important, it's so important. And it's a people's business where behind the door, or behind the scenes, you talk to people, let me just call them. Let's not create big drama, but let me find a way of getting it done, And that's actually how, particularly, the dicier situations, they don't get done by big egos. They get done by people talking and see what we can do.
I love that, and I want to hear your perspective on artificial intelligence, because like there's a lot going on in artificial intelligence, and there's a couple bankers that believe, our job is going to vanish. The markets will not need us anymore because, everything you do, artificial intelligence can do. I don't believe that. I believe that investment banking is a people's game. I need to read my client. I need to make an interesting proposition that suits him, but also fits the strategic goals of the other side of the table. We have to compromise. I have to look for this balance. And I just don't see that being done by artificial intelligence. And in order to develop people that are able to manage these issues, I need to train them from the bottom. I need, junior analysts growing to associates, growing to VP, accumulating experience, living through different deals. I know I can, upload on whatever large language model that you have all my transactions, what I've done, but it's always a people's deal. I need to interact with people, and unless there's an artificial intelligence on the other side of the table making those decisions, which I don't believe we'll get there, I need a human on this side. What is your perspective? Am I making any sense here?
We've got another 12 episodes coming forward in the near future to you. Let me try to be succinct about it. There's room for artificial intelligence for certain things, but it's only as good as plausibility, kind of checks it, And maybe, the making of PowerPoint presentations
will be easier.
Yeah. Fine. Maybe certain research functions
definitely
can be made easier. It's like there's a room for it. Setting aside that we haven't solved the energy to create all this artificial intelligence, but that's again another 12 episodes. But so I think there's a room for it. But I totally agree. At the end of the day, and maybe artificial intelligence is also so all-encompassing. Maybe certain trading functions. When we talk about whatever markets, certain trading functions, there might just be platform to platform, and hopefully you've got some, somebody still making sure
just monitoring
that there's some plausibility checking. I think deal making, again, maybe some of the input for starting people to think about this. Yes, there is room for and can take over certain functions, but I agree for the foreseeable future. A deal gets done by people, talking to each other. I give you an example. A few years ago, I was working on a transaction, and a guy who I'd worked with many times, and we're still friends and still talk, even in my afterlife, after big corporate, said, Michi, we got it approved, but I won't be able to send you a commitment letter until 2 days because somebody's out there. Please put me in the syndicate. And I said to him, Juan Pablo, don't you worry. Your word. I don't give a flying whatever about your letter. Your word. If you tell me this is done, then we do this. This cannot be replaced by artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence. Client says no commitment letter, we should not accept it. But there's a human component. And guess what? This led to many more things because the guy remembered, Michi trusts me. I knew he came through with it. I took a bit of a risk, but I didn't, but the judgment, So I think in deal making, at the end of the day, particularly when it gets more complex, well, I need a little bit of this. I need a little bit of this. Well, can you wait a little bit? This is not going to be, I don't know, I don't know. Never know. But for me, in the foreseeable future, deal making, and I don't know much about, I would imagine M&A the same, but in putting bank groups together, where again, it's so important who you speak to, that the person, trusts you. People have told me, it's actually funny that you're involved now. Okay, we'll take a look now. And that's not because of me, but I built trust with people over time. And I don't think AI can build trust, And as I always say, let's first overcome human stupidity before we completely rely on artificial intelligence.
I love that. One last question on this section. When I'm talking about financial markets to the students, I like saying that the financial markets is essentially the same it was 100 years old. Like we do M&A the same way we've done M&A in the past. I believe we do credit in the same way we do credit. We have done credit in the past. Of course, the market's more sophisticated. Of course, now we have Excel spreadsheets. We didn't have that 100 years ago. But in the same, like in the essence of doing transactions in the financial markets hasn't changed. People still buy and sell stock. People buy and sell companies. We do share purchase agreements. We do loans. We syndicate loans. How much did syndication essentially change over this 20 years or 25 years?
I agree with you. The fundamentals are the same. I mean, the financial markets, there are so many aspects to it. I mean, there are certain markets I will never understand, and they're far too sophisticated for me. So I cannot speak to all markets.
All right.
So, I mean, it's always hard, to speak the financial markets because they're very, exotic option tradings. I don't understand the first thing about it. Yeah. And I cannot tell you whether they have changed or not, Certain markets that I'm familiar with, yes, I think the fundamentals still, you have to have a sense of credit. You have to have a sense of who does what and who comes in. I think I mentioned earlier, I think what has changed, it's, transaction, a lot of particularly assessing market capacity or interest. And I would maybe similar in the M&A markets and others, has become a much more transaction-specific consideration. It's not, to come back to my example, 3 times levered mining company, $100 million EBITDA in Peru. These are the 20 global players. They don't exist in that form anymore.
Yeah.
So it's become much more. In a way, it's a continuation of the theme. Yes, it's still a market analysis. Who does what and why do people look at it? But so it's evolving, but the fundamentals, I agree. They're still, some players come, others players go, 5 years ago, Deutsche Bank exited emerging markets. They would publicly deny that, but I dare to say it. Now they're coming back,
Yeah.
Okay, so that's that's almost a little bit kind of, variation and noise on the margin. The fundamentals are still the same, so people will need credit. Not all credit can be provided by the locals. If you talk about, say, Latin America, then at times you have new players come in, whether it's insurance companies, some private credit. There's always been the talk about, the Asian bit. Well, the Asian bit is much more differentiated, just because, all of a sudden half of the league tables show China. Well, that's policy loans. Really, day to day, it's not really that much, so there are always players that come and go, but the fundamentals, the trend, it's a pretty steady business.
In emerging markets, it is even more critical that we have so few women and Black people in the financial markets. So that's why we created You in Banking. You in Banking is a 100% free education program targeted at Black people and women that aims at working in the financial markets. There are 9 steps. So they have to train 9 different courseworks in order to be selected to a 10th program, where we work with only 25 people on site over 4 weeks to prepare them to excel at the financial markets. Our goal is to get all those people at the same level, at the best candidates in the market, interviewing for a position in an international large bank at Faria Lima, and be selected because they are good, because they are going to be excellent employees. Learn more about You in Banking at the website here on your screen. We're now shifting gears to our last part, which is a little bit about you. So, what else is there about Michi Jakob? Like, what is not on your curriculum that is extraordinary about you?
Well, it would be a high level of arrogance to talk about anything extraordinary from my point of view. But I give you an example. I mean, when I was interviewed for Credit Suisse, to this day, the people, none of which are there anymore, made fun when they saw a picture. I had a goatee, which was highly unusual at the time. And I put in my CV that I do yoga. So what the heck are we hiring this guy for? So it was, and nowadays it's kind of part of work-life balance, but I was an early adopter, I think the other thing that...
do you still practice yoga?
I do, yeah.
Why do you think someone should practice yoga? Since
I don't think anybody should practice yoga.
All right.
I think people, if they feel like it, if that's the right thing for them, then they should practice yoga. I think it's, again, I'm more and more, I don't think there's the prescription, the recipe, you should do it. Don't do it because somebody, said you should do it.
All right.
Do it if you say, well, that interests me. And maybe somebody said you should try it, and try it. But if you don't like it, it's okay. I think, probably the most unusual thing that, doesn't happen too often in the financial industry. I'm very involved with clowning. I'm a practicing clown. As you see, I have my red nose. I actually have an Instagram account called The Clown on Wall Street. My fundamental philosophy is people take themselves far too serious. And I also support an organization called Clowns Without Borders, where we bring joy into areas of desperation and natural disaster and catastrophe around the globe. So I'm a big believer in relief through laughter. So that might be the more unusual part, and it has triggered a lot of thinking for me. And one story which I share, which I think is one of the most powerful messages. In one of my first physical comedy clown trainings that I took, a very well-regarded clown trainer and practitioner said, "Stop, Michi, stop it right there." And we were doing an exercise. He said, "You know what? You've got stage presence. Stop playing with your strength. Why don't you start playing with your weakness?" Having worked in Wall Street all my life, I said, what the heck, man? I mean, you show weakness on Wall Street and people think, you're a wuss, this. Yeah. But when you actually consciously do it, kind of it's like, like in martial arts, you go with a punch, it's kind of, so you know what? I don't know what you're saying. I don't understand. Explain it to me. You know what? Or, I don't like this. And all of a sudden people are disarmed because we're used to in Wall Street, you gotta be, and all of a sudden say, you know what? I don't know this. And people are, hold on, what is this now? So that's, I think in that way, I mean, not, to glorify myself, I'm a bit unusual, I've never fully bought into the, big macho culture on Wall Street. But I think there are other ways of doing it, and you still can be yourself and have fun.
Wow. Tell me how it started. When did you decide to take the training, and how did it enter your life?
Well, it entered it probably much earlier. I was as a kid, I liked to go to the circus.
Are you have you always been the funny guy?
To this date, I'm not funny, but it's like, but in a way, I've always been kind of a little bit outgoing, and, but I've always also liked, theater. Yeah? Actually, at the end of high school, as I had to decide what to do for some period, was even considering going to acting school. Always been an extra in the local theater. So I even considered that. For a number of reasons, I decided against it. But at high school, later at university, I was always into acting, because I think there's something nice to it, And as it is, and it's a little side where actually at the end of my master's, I was even thinking about potentially pursuing a PhD, thinking about how theater and directing can inform corporate strategy. And one of the other things that I'm currently thinking about is how can clowning and acting actually inform corporate development and leadership. And it's actually, there's a book, I forgot the name, by two professors from the Stanford Business School called Humor Seriously, who even teach a course at Stanford on how humor is relevant in organizational development, So a little bit inspired by that, but I came across it coincidentally, and I started thinking about it before. What does a clown do? A clown, or a good clown, for that matter, stand-up comedian reads the room, helps, reads the room, makes light of the little failures. And I think that's what we are in business inherently bad of it. We don't read the room often very well with colleagues, with employees, with counterparties, so like this empathetic thing. And then sometimes just the worst things is when you try to be funny. There's some people, and I hate these, who at every corner think they need to make a joke. It needs to kind of flow naturally, kind of just picking up something, that you didn't think about, or in the least, and all of a sudden, you can, how should I say this, kind of, reduce tension or focus people back to it, and, even let people be a little bit kind of themselves. And there's a lot, and I'm thinking more and more about it. I think there's a lot, to this. Now, I digressed. How did I get into it? About 13, 14 years ago, I was very frustrated and tired, and I looked up. I hadn't done any acting in a long time. I looked up, clown workshops. I was, in my living room in New York where I live, clown workshops, New York. And lo and behold, that weekend there was a clown workshop coming to place. And I went in there, still friends with these people, and, still in touch with them. And, I called the woman and said, I'm a banker, I've never done this, done some acting. Yeah, come on, we welcome all people. And, that's how it started.
I guess you had a lot of time there, a lot of fun that night.
I did, but it also, it's fun. I had a lot of fun there, but it actually made me think about a lot of things.
Yeah, amazing. Fantastic.
So
I'd love to learn about that. Thank you.
Clownswithoutborders.org.
Our last guest left you a question.
Oh boy.
I have to tell you, it's a tricky one. He asked, talk about a big mistake in your life, of your professional life. And he was specific, professional life. And what did you learn from it?
It's a tough one. And I don't want to say I didn't make any mistakes, because that's a stupid answer. I made plenty of mistakes, and I come back to a little bit the being the corporate cynic with the distance that I have now. And it's something in the aftermath of the, disappearance of Credit Suisse, talking to some other colleagues. I think one mistake, and I know this can be held against me, was probably I was too loyal for too long. And maybe took too much comfort from a position. I think one of the things, I would, and I'm not regretting anything, but with the benefit of hindsight, there's this, we're in a team, we get reasonably well paid, yes, we complain, but it's all things considered reasonably well. We've got a good team. And that also limits at times limits your view of looking outside. You almost become too loyal. Yeah. So I maybe made the mistake, and I don't regret anything, and I'm very happy. I can tell you I'm genuinely happy where I am right now. and I am where I am maybe because I made mistakes. So it's a very, that's why I'm struggling with the question. But maybe what I would recommend people to avoid the mistakes, just maybe every 4 or 5 years, just think about, is it still the right place? Are there other things? Is there kind of, and I never, because it was a very comfortable place and we had time, we had a good time. Maybe I could have avoided losing a lot of money in the aftermath of Credit Suisse had I made assessments earlier. But one is blinded, sucked into it. And that is, I think, the one thing, if you call about the meta mistakes that one makes. Yeah. Where I say, I probably was not critical enough about my own career. It kind of sounds counterintuitive because I did okay, but no. It's one of these things where, again, with the benefit of hindsight, I would say, okay, assess, where am I? Is that the right thing? Are there alternatives? But it's also very hard to take that step when you're in a very good, environment, when you have a good time, when you get along with people. So
I hear you, because I can identify myself with what you're saying. I spent 10 years at Deutsche Bank, and I'm very proud of having committed so much time to that institutions, to the people who have worked with me, especially to Steve Cunningham, who was a big sponsor of my career. But I should have been a little bit more selfish at certain times. And I was more into the bigger picture, sort of like yourself, I'm having fun, I am making some money, I could be doing more somewhere else, and I could be doing less somewhere else, fine. And I saw no reason to search for different opportunities, and I have, at that point, I did not reassess my career. So I'm pretty much on your page on this one, and I don't regret anything I've done. But I think that is a great advice.
But it's this, and again, not to be too cynical, is like, the notion of corporate loyalty doesn't exist.
No. And,
I give you the example, when I was fired. That's not the technical term. People say I was restructured twice in my career. I remember sitting in the office with the HR person from Deutsche Bank, to finally sign, my separation agreement. And I looked at the woman in HR and our values, dedication. I forgot, but essentially the same corporate feel-good factors, loyalty, profitability, integrity. I don't know, whatever, nice, warm and fuzzy stuff. And I said to the woman, so before we sign that, don't worry, we're going to sign it. I just want to ask you a question. I've been incredibly loyal. I've never lost a penny for the bank. I dedicated this. And it's nothing personal. Sometimes we just have to make uncomfortable. So all this warm and fuzzy is as good as you benefit an organization. And it's always very strange to say the organization for them. Who is them? I don't know who them is, But I think the advice is be critical. Yes, work hard, spend your time, but also have a critical distance.
Be critical.
Have a critical distance to the organization, and this corporate warm and fuzzy.
Yeah, I like that. That's a great advice. Michi, thank you very much.
Thank you.
It was
been
great.
A pleasure. I really enjoyed that conversation. Good to catch up.
It was great. I hope we do this again sometime.
Would love to. Hope to be here more often, and then we'll do one of the many 12 serious follow-ups that we have to do.
Perfect.